All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and let's get started. Thank you for being here today for this webinar presented by Behavioral Economics in Action at Rotman in partnership with the Behavioral Science and Policy Association. This is our 7th webinar of this academic year. My name is Lorenzo, and I'm a first-year PhD in marketing at Rotman, a Bayer research coordinator and the moderator for today's webinar. Behavioral Economics in Action at Rotman, or Bayer, is a research center at the University of Toronto, Rotman School of Management, whose 3 programmatic missions are to research, to educate, and engage in meaningful outreach with our academic, governmental, and industry partners. These monthly webinars are our way to hear firsthand from academics and practitioners who are making a meaningful impact in the world of behavioral insights, in particular, behaviorally informed businesses and evidence-based public policy. We're delighted today to have Anjali Chainani, the Director of Policy at GovLabPHL, at the Mayor's Office in the City of Philadelphia, presenting the value of a policy lab within local government. Before I introduce Anjali, I would like to go over the ground rules for this webinar. Following this introduction, our speaker will deliver a 30 to 35 minutes presentation. During the presentation, please submit questions for our speaker by clicking the chat tab at the top right of your WebEx screen and typing into the entry box. These questions will be visible to all the participants. At the end of the talk, and with time permitting, we'll have a Q&A session in which I will select questions from the chat to ask our speaker. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anjali Chainani. As mentioned before, Anjali is the Director of Policy and GovLab at the Mayor's Office in the City of Philadelphia. As Director of Policy, she coordinates policy development to ensure the success of important long-term city investments, including the passage of the sugar-sweetened beverage tax. As Director of GovLab, Anjali leads a multi-agency team centered on embedding evidence-based and data-driven practices into city programs and services through cross-sector collaboration. GovLab experiments with how evidence-based methods can intersect to address common municipal challenges to enhance the city policymaking and service redesign efforts. Anjali was also a local government fellow with Results for America from 2016 to 2019. This program was founded in September 2014 to implement strategies that consistently use data and evidence to drive policy and budget decisions on major policy challenges. Anjali holds dual graduate degrees from Temple University in public health and social work, and she is currently completing her PhD in health policy at the University of Sciences in Philadelphia. So thank you, Anjali, for being here today, and please take it away.
Thank you so much. I am going to start my presentation. Lorenzo, thank you again, and thank you to the Behavioral Economics in Action at Rotman for having me today to talk about the value that a policy lab can have within local government. And I'm specifically going to be talking about our GovLabPHL initiative that we started in Philadelphia in 2017. So first, just a little bit about me and then a little bit about my team. So as Lorenzo mentioned, I have a background in social work and public health. Hopefully, I will be graduating with my PhD this May, so prayers for that, please. And then I spent 10 years as a city council staffer, so I've been with city government since 2005.
Sorry, hi Anjali, I'm not able to see your screen now, so can you try sharing your screen again?
Yes, sorry, 1 second. How about...
Yep.
Now?
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I spent 10 years as a city council staffer and then joined the mayor's office in 2016 when our mayor was elected to office. And then just a little bit about me, my husband and I love cycling, and so that is our kind of passion outside of the workplace. The GovLabPHL initiative and the work of the policy office is done by this team, so I wanted to quickly highlight them. It's 4 of us in the mayor's policy office. Nandi O'Connor is our Policy and Digital Content Manager. Yuan Huang is our Assistant Director of Policy, and Nathaniel Olin is a social scientist who joined us initially through a grant, and we were able to keep him on board. The GovLabPHL initiative has been a collaborative effort. We did not really know how big the initiative was going to get, and so we've been co-designing it and iterating on it since 2017. And I'll talk more about that as I continue to go forward. So one thing I just want to mention, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with local government or work in that setting, and this may be obvious, but I think it's always easy to forget how many services local governments actually provide. So services that are really essential for city residents, from preventing foreclosure to zoning, creating affordable housing, social services for families and communities. And despite the need for any of those services, city programs are actually often underutilized. People aren't accessing them either because they don't know about them or there's some barrier in place. So as government, we are relying on residents to take specific actions. So for example, we want them to pay their taxes on time or their license fees on time. We want them to put their trash out on trash day. We want them to engage in our bike share program. We want them to respond to the mail that we send them, and so on and so forth. So that list can really go on. The cities across our country have started to move towards using different evidence-based methods. In our case, we've been applying behavioral insights quite a bit, but evidence-based policy is really becoming a trend with local governments. In Philadelphia in particular, there's also amazing researchers at a number of institutions here locally who were also kind of doing a lot of research around decision making, and we have experts that served on the social behavioral sciences team at the federal level here locally at the University of Pennsylvania. We also have partners at Temple University and Swarthmore College. So there was a kind of natural alignment between what the city wanted to do and what academics were doing in this area of behavioral science. And then one of our mayor's major commitments is to improve government and have government be effective and efficient. And so this body of work really falls within that pillar. So what is GovLab? So similar to Rotman having kind of three missions, GovLab is a multi-agency team that's led by us in the policy office that focuses on lifting up the use of data and evidence within city government. So we have three streams of work that we focus on. The first is creating learning opportunities for city employees. So this, I'll go into detail about some of the examples, but it's really an effort to create a space where city employees can come and learn about either a new evidence-based practice, learn new tools, hear from a speaker, or really engage with their colleagues about how they might be able to improve upon their outcomes that they're trying to achieve. The second stream of work is our biggest kind of area where we're piloting small modifications to programs using behavioral insights. And so we're testing and doing that type of prototyping. And then the last stream of work is ensuring that the public has access to learn about these new initiatives and best practices. So back to the learning opportunities. There's a few things that we do here. First, we have a bi-weekly GovLabPHL meeting that rotates discussion leaders. So we bring together anywhere between 15 to 20 people every other Monday. My office will help create the agenda, but essentially we have certain kind of project updates, but then every member of the team will have a chance to bring an item for discussion. It can really be anything as long as it is related to data and evidence in some way. And so that has helped create buy-in and develop leadership and really have people contribute to this discussion around evidence and data in the city. The second thing that we did in 2017 is that we partnered with a city agency known as the Office of Open Data and Digital Transformation, and we had a speaker series for 10 months on a particular evidence-based practice, which was human-centered design. So that also helped build a culture of people that were interested in this kind of work. We started a PHL government book club. We stole this idea from Baltimore. Maryland. And every quarter or so, we will pick a book, encourage city employees to read either the whole book or a certain chapter, and then we'll convene people to talk about the ideas in that book, what might be possible in local government, and really what stood out to them. The book club has been difficult to get people to participate either after work or at a noontime session. So we tested out the use of author talks and having the author come in for an hour to talk about their book. And that has been extremely popular. So we are trying to do that more often. So we have those, and then we have an annual conference that we hold every year that brings together city employees and local academics together to really be a day of where we're sharing partnerships that we've created, projects that are going on, and really it's the place where new projects are born through those collaborations. And then lastly, one thing new that we did in 2019 was we created this calendar. So I hope you can kind of see it. It's a wall calendar. It highlights a different cognitive bias each month, and it's really just a way of keeping different behavioral insights or cognitive biases at the top of mind, and it's something that our city employees can use throughout the year. So we're always kind of thinking about how we can engage city employees in these different ways. The next kind of stream of work that I had mentioned is this behavioral science initiative. It's co-led by my team as well as local academics. And so on the academic side, we have Dan Hopkins from the University of Pennsylvania, Sion Benoit from Swarthmore College, Evan Nessertak, who runs the Behavioral Scientist online magazine, and Suzanne Schwartz from Princeton University. And together with these academics, we've really expanded the pool of academics that are interested in working with the city. We will identify a pilot project that is low cost for the city and run a low cost evaluation. And I have some examples of those later on in the presentation. So just a bit about behavioral science. I am not a behavioral scientist, as you saw on my background. We do have a social scientist on staff, but really what we've learned through our partnership with academics is that behavioral science implies these insights around human behavior, that people assume that they are more like Spock, so unemotional, they make decisions rationally, when really we are all a little bit like Homer Simpson. We are irrational at times, and that can have huge implications for policy and for the environment that we live and work in. So taking those insights, we are realizing, especially as policymakers and government officials, that this is really important because our environment does have an impact on our behavior. Our emotions do play a role in our decision making, and our intuition about what is going to lead us to take an action can be flawed by our environment. And so understanding how people think and how they act can really help agencies at every level of government improve how we're delivering services to the public. And behavioral insights is really bringing, as you may already know, bringing psychology and economics and other social disciplines together. So it's been extremely valuable for our city agencies. These are just some examples that I'll go through later of the behavioral toolkit. Again, our team was exposed to this for the first time in 2016 when we really started this work, and we've been able to apply these insights in really effective ways. I want to quickly just kind of illuminate the number of partners that we've been able to bring together. This initiative is not funded directly through the city, but as we have different events or a specific project, these partners, the behavioral scientist, the Fells Policy Research Initiative, Penn School of Arts and Sciences, the Lang Center of Civic and Social Responsibility, and Swarthmore College have all kind of contributed in some way or another, whether that's through researchers' time or contributing to the conference or printing materials or helping us find funding for a particular project. So the support has been really phenomenal throughout this process. And then the last stream of work is the resident engagement piece, and I'm looking forward to maybe having a little bit of a discussion about this if possible. This has been the most difficult stream to put into place because as we are designing a pilot experiment or an evaluation, it has been difficult to know exactly when residents can be engaged in that process. However, in last year, and this is still going on this year, we engaged residents to help redesign a few city forms. And we learned about this idea through Washington, D.C. So we engaged 6 city agencies. We had residents come in on a Saturday morning, give us their feedback on how easy or difficult those forms were. And then we engaged content experts and service designers and social science and behavioral scientists to help us turn those insights into actionable recommendations. And so our Office of Open Data and Digital Transformation that manages the city's website is also helping us redesign these forms. We're doing the redesign in phases, and they should be ready for reveal by June of this year, and we'll have an event with the mayor, which we're really excited about. So that's one way that we've been able to get residents engaged. Another possible way that we're thinking about this year is through our resident survey. We do this survey around every other year, and we're hoping that based on the results, then we may be able to design an experiment based on what residents really want to see city government doing and investing in. Another way that we've shared our work is we have government publications. So I will be talking about a specific experiment in just a little bit, and we have the full protocol on our city's website. We also have academics. We give them the permission to publish and sometimes even co-author with our city agencies and employees. And then we also have digital content. So those are just some ways that we are trying to think about how to engage residents. But if there are ideas from you all, I'm happy to hear them. And then these are just some examples. We have an innovation lab, which is a space where we can convene different agencies. And so up here on the top is our book club event where we had an author talk and just really trying to show that bringing different agencies together to just have these discussions and be aware of how government can use data and evidence has been important to us. And it's really fostered a great community of people through this process. As I mentioned, we do have a Twitter account. If you are not yet following GovLabPHL, please do. We have just kind of a robust level of engagement on there and are excited to always share what we're doing and who we have visiting and things like that. All right, so to go into some of the pilot tests that we've run, this one was around testing loss aversion and checklists, and we partnered with our HR, Human Resources Department and Wellness Program. So we also, the academic partner on this project was with Swarthmore College. So we connected with the wellness program, which began in our city in 2011. It includes around 6,400 city employees and retirees. It also involves spouses to participate by logging their, conducting a health risk assessment, improving their, logging of health information. And so in order for city employees to save $500 on their health insurance, they have to complete a certain amount of activities, and their spouse has to complete that as well. So really the goal of this project was to identify, can a postcard sent to the home of the city employee really increase engagement, and does a checklist work as well? So the goal was really to get participation to increase. And the department was engaging employees in lots of different ways, but didn't really know what was working. Postcards were one of the ways that they were doing this. So because it was a large sample size, we thought this might be the best one to test. So to give you an example, these are the visuals. The loss frame is that you may lose $500 by not participating in this program versus you may gain $500 from participating. There were 4, random assignments to one of these 4 versions of the postcard. And then you'll see we used no checklist, which is, this information was similar between no checklist and checklist. But with the checklist side, you'll see that we have kind of these tick boxes, and we've shown that just by reviewing this card, you've already checked off a box, and now you just have 4 more steps to go. So as far as results, city employees responded slightly more to the loss frame, while retirees responded slightly more to the gain frame. So this kind of showed us there was differences between subgroups of employees, and that was interesting and important for our city agency to learn. In regards to the checklist, both employees and retirees actually responded to the version without a checklist, and we did not expect that. So that was an interesting finding. Next, I'm going to run through just 4 or 5 of these quick examples of different projects, because we have projects across city agencies, and they vary quite a bit in their in what the policy question that we're looking at. At the beginning of this administration, we created the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet. The cabinet is an interdepartmental effort to reduce recycling. And we already knew that recycling saves Philadelphia over $5 million, which was something we learned in 2017. And we also learned through observation that 60% of a typical staff member's total time spent was picking up litter and managing waste. And so we wanted to see what we could maybe do in the environment to impact litter and recycling. Just a quick note that when we design these experiments, we try to identify what agencies are already doing and layer an experiment on that, which is how we've been able to keep this initiative at low cost. So the city was already developing a litter index. This is again, departmental-wide collaboration to develop a tool that allows us to take litter counts and create an aggregated score of an area of how bad that litter is from 1 to 4. And so we wanted to use that as a way of seeing whether litter increased or decreased in an area. So we had 2 experiments that we ran here, 2 interventions. The first was around distributing recycling bins, and these are big blue bins with lids in target neighborhoods. We flyered homes approximately along 4 recycling routes, so 2 in each neighborhood, and then we notified them that they were eligible to pick up these bins free of charge. For the outcome measures, we measured the weight of the recycled material on a weekly basis for each affected route, and the weight of the recycled material on a weekly basis of the other routes in the neighborhood that did not receive flyering to pick up this bin. And I'll go back to the results in just a second. The second intervention was manipulating the number of public trash baskets that were available in parks and on commercial corridors. And so we wanted to rotate each site through either having an additional amount of public waste bins or less. And so the goal was really to have each site experience all conditions and see if the amount of trash collected as litter increased or decreased, the amount of trash collected from baskets, the number of staff hours that was being spent on litter removal, as well as using the weekly litter index for that as well. On this slide, you'll see these results are published on our cleanphl.org website. In the chat box, I can put the website there when I'm finished with this presentation, and you're welcome to go take a look at the protocol and see exactly what we did and the results. So overall, with the blue bins that we distributed, in one neighborhood, it resulted in an increase of an average of ½ a ton per week. If this intervention had been implemented across entire government, we could have resulted in an annual savings of around $10,000. So that was significant for the department to learn that was possible. In the other neighborhood, unfortunately, the way that the data was collected, it was not easy to analyze after the experiment. And so, it gave us better insight into data collection procedures, going back and understanding what may have happened, but the data was just too variable when we got it back. So unfortunately, we weren't able to see if it worked in that neighborhood. In regards to what happened as a result of that experiment, and did we use those results in any way, just out of the results from the one neighborhood showing that recycling did increase by at least ½ a ton, we were able to increase recycling bin distribution in locations beyond the 6 sanitation sites. So we were distributing recycling bins at 6 specific sites throughout the city, and now we've expanded that to over 18 sites at specific recreation centers. We're also piloting an investment in larger bins with attached lids, so that's something else that we got out of that experiment as well. In regards to the publicly accessible waste bins, it did lead to a 30-minute decrease in the amount of time spent picking up litter when we had more bins on a commercial corridor or in parks. The result of this experiment has really invited us to look at encouraging businesses to maybe adopt a receptacle to have more bins on those corridors. And we're continuing to work with the cabinet to see what other experiments might be possible in 2019. All right, the next experiment, this is the first one that we did with a nonprofit organization who is serving the same residents that city agencies are serving. Excuse me. So Philly VIP is a nonprofit organization in Philadelphia that provides free representation, legal representation to low-income Philadelphians. And initially, when this project started, tangled titles was an issue that really negatively impacts city residents. If they are living in a home that they don't own, it gets very difficult for them to access city services. But Philadelphia VIP was only matching 2/3 of eligible clients with a volunteer attorney. And so we decided that increasing the number of voluntary attorneys available might be a good thing to look at. So what we did for this project, it involved around just under 3,000 attorneys on Philadelphia VIP's roster. We randomly assigned them to one of 3 conditions. One was if they agree to take a case, they are eligible to win a social reward. An example of that is maybe a gift card that rewards the entire team or their entire staff. The other option was they had a chance to win a personal reward, just a gift card for themselves. And then the third condition was nothing different, just a regular email pitch and no gift offered. This project we are wrapping up, so we don't have results just yet, but we should have results by this summer. So I'm excited that we'll be able to share those soon. The next project that I quickly want to go over is around our basic systems repair program. So this is a home repair program for low-income households in Philadelphia. There is a long waiting list, and often what happens, but by the time someone is at the top of the list and eligible for their intake appointment, they have moved on and don't respond to city communication. So we're unsure what ends up happening. They could have gotten that repair fixed, they could have moved, their situation could have changed, and so we were wondering how we might be able to communicate with them and increase the response rate. Over 40% of people requesting the service ended up not showing up for their initial intake appointment. So that was the goal that we were really trying to move the needle on. This study involved around 2,500 individuals who had not responded to 3 previous appointment letters. We randomly assigned them to 2 versions of a letter. One letter came from the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, which is standard procedure, but the other letter, the second version, actually came from an elected official, their council person. Both letters used new language, so we simplified the letter, increased kind of accessibility of the letter and the language that was being used. And I'll give you an example. So on the left is the letter that was sent by the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, and on the right is the letter sent by City Council. So overall, the council letter was doing slightly better depending on the district council person. So there wasn't a significant difference in response rates with the letter that came from PHDC versus the council person. However, 17% of participants responded to this new letter after not responding to 3 previous letters sent by PHDC. So we're curious about whether or not, maybe it was the language that helped increase understanding and accessibility of what was being offered by the city through that letter. The organization or the city agency has moved forward with using this new client-friendly language going forward, so we're excited about that result, even though we couldn't see a difference in the actual letter versions. Just a couple more examples here, and then I'll take questions. So we have a public health department that has an initiative called Get Healthy Philly. They were seeing an increase in tobacco sales to youth Between our fiscal year 17 and 18, it went up from 12% to 33%. And so they really wanted to try to better understand best practices for decreasing tobacco sales to minors. Currently, what happens, the department already invests in a compliance check process. So trained minors will accompany an adult. They're sent to purchase tobacco from a retailer. And if there is a violation, if that retailer sells tobacco to that youth, because their ID is not checked, then the very next day they are delivered a ticket to the retailer. They're fined for violating that law. Retailers that violate are rechecked in between 30 days and 90 days. If there's no subsequent violation, retailers are not checked again until the next year. Because we wanted to understand best practices and we also had invested in doing a greater number of compliance checks, we wanted to see if the number of compliance checks really mattered. So we did 2 randomized control trials in this case. Retailers were randomized into one of 3 groups, either to have 1 check a year, 2 checks a year, or 3. And we're randomizing the compliance checks frequency to really test the effect on the number of checks and to see if violation rates go down or stay the same. Hopefully they don't go up. The second RCT was half of the retailers that receive a ticket last year will also receive this newly designed flyer that communicates that they've violated the law and the behavior that we want them to model in our city. And so right now, data is still being collected on this. We're almost complete with this experiment. And again, with this one, we should have results by this summer to share. Last experiment, and then I'll talk a little bit about the impact of this work. So this year, starting for May and November for our election season, we wanted to identify that while voter turnout is generally high in presidential elections, it's fairly low in off-year elections. And so we started with the question of how can we mobilize more voters during off-year elections. After looking into the existing data, we saw that voter turnout also varies substantially by specific wards in the city. Some wards we're seeing a decline in turnout relative to others. And so then the question became, how can the city re-engage voters who have voted in the past but failed to show up in recent elections? And so this is a messaging experiment that we are kicking off in May and November of this year, and we're still in the design process for this project. So there's been some really great impact as a result of this work. Just in regards to the processes that city is using, policy development, and then also in the space of innovation. In regards to policy, as I mentioned with that zero waste and litter experiment, and in one neighborhood, we were unable to tell if the results had an impact. It helped us look at what our processes were and looking at how we can develop a consistent data collection procedure process across all neighborhoods when it comes to recycling tonnage collection. So having these opportunities to improve data collection in city agencies as a result of an experiment has been a really important learning process for us. Also assessing how departments are doing outreach efforts. Are they sending mail? Are they sending postcards? Is there an opportunity to test if what they're doing is working? So really assessing what is happening and how can it be improved or changed or modified in some way. Generally, just doing experiments because of the rigorous process of identifying who, the population that you're serving, the policy question that you have, bringing together people for a few months of time to design the experiment together. It's really increased accountability and transparency in city government as well, and has set some great best practice examples for us. In regards to the kind of policy realm, we have been able to narrow really key policy questions with diverse partners. As you may have experienced, sometimes work can be done in a silo with just a small group of people. And this process has allowed us to bring academics to the table, different city agencies, different levels of leadership to really participate in broader discussions around policy. I mentioned this earlier with our wellness experiment. We've gotten insights on subpopulations that help us inform our strategy and our policy. So knowing that retirees may respond slightly differently than current city employees may help the department adjust their strategy a bit for next year. Generally, the results of these experiments and the learnings that we're getting are informing the way we design new programs or new investments and initiatives. And then it's also helped agencies make economic and operational justifications. So based on what they learned from doing X, this is why we think we should invest more money in recycling bins, for example. Lastly, for some agencies, they have been quite understandably operating on a hunch. They think that something is going to work well, that the letter that they designed will result in response rates being high. But having this opportunity to bring academics and city employees together really allows us to design an intervention and test that hunch. Is that actually the case of what we think is happening? It's been an opportunity to also retrain staff in new innovative methods. So we've sometimes, in some cases, been able to link redesign and human-centered design with the letters, for example, as well as a experiment using behavioral insights. So really bringing different evidence-based methods together and retraining staff about how they can use those in their work moving forward. And then we also have an Office of Innovation Technology, and so this work has really built off of existing work going on in the city around innovation and expanding that culture of innovation that we have. So that is it for my presentation for now. I will pause and see if there are any questions that I can answer. And thank you so much again for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Anjali. I personally find it really interesting and exciting to learn how behaviorally relevant findings are applied to better the community of Philadelphia. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We actually have one question for our audience, which refers back to the calendar you showed us at the very beginning, the one containing behavioral biases. The audience would like to know if is there a copy available online, or is there a PDF version that people may be able to access to?
And I'm sorry, can you just say that again? A PDF for a copy of what is it?
The calendar that you showed us at the very beginning of your presentation. Yeah, right. The one containing behavioral biases.
Yes. So we actually have a few extras, which I am happy to try to mail to some people that have an interest in getting this calendar. Of course, it's going to be useful for the remainder of the year. I do believe we have a PDF because we did need to send it to the printer, so I'm happy to share that.
That's really generous.
One thing that I neglected to mention, which I think, let me just pull up my favorite month and I can give a better example, but we partnered with a cartoonist. And again, this was credit to the behavioral scientist for making this connection in this link, and they had an artist on their staff. But in addition to the month, and I know this is difficult to see, and I'm not doing a good job at putting it up to the
it's very good
to the camera, but we highlight a different cognitive bias. So for October, we highlight moral licensing. So it says here, when you do something to improve your self-image, it can actually lead you to make a more immoral choice in the future because you are less concerned about the consequences of those actions. We provide a resource where you can get more information if you're interested. And then we have a cartoonist that has designed kind of just a funny image to go with that. So for moral licensing, the image is a woman eating a bowl of Kit Kats, and it says, "I drank a kale smoothie this morning, so it's cool if I eat this entire tub of Kit Kats." So she's kind of giving herself the moral license to eat even worse in the afternoon than she did in the morning.
That surely happens to me a lot too.
The other quick thing that I'll mention, if it's okay, is process has been really important in this initiative. And again, we have iterated this over time. We did not have all the answers when we started, but we quickly realized after our first project that having something in place like a project map, just hold this up, that really highlights what all the steps are in a project so that everyone can be aware of the level of commitment that is needed to see an experiment follow through from beginning to end is something that we created. So we created this kind of one-page sheet that shows how we start the conversation is really bringing people together for an initial conversation about the policy question. At what point do we engage our university IRBs in our city, lawyers to talk about data sharing? At what point do we start thinking about data analysis and randomization, and then discussing next steps and sharing sharing the results? So kind of outlining all of that very clearly is important.
Yeah, it's very good. I personally had another question I wanted to ask you, and it's about basically implementing the research. I wanted to ask you what was the most challenging part about embedding research and evaluation in your programs and operations?
I think the most challenging part was identifying how it would be possible given existing city procedures. Of course, doing an experiment can be disruptive, and so creating that buy-in and really having a collaborative understanding of, yes, this may be difficult. Every step of the way is not going to be easy, but given what we have the potential of learning as a result of this experiment, can really further how we design policy, how we serve residents. And so, those conversations take time to navigate, take time to have. So I would say that has been kind of every project presents its own challenges, but staying committed to getting that buy-in and that collaboration.
Yeah,
it's important.
I can definitely see that being a big challenge. One last question, and then we'll move on towards the conclusion of this webinar. Actually, from a perspective of a future or a researcher, I wanted to ask you, what can researchers do to better support government partners in this process?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. For us, because we are not the experts in a particular methodology, having researchers bring that to the table. So ensuring that as we're thinking about the question that we want to answer and how we want to answer it, making sure that our process is rigorous so that we can rely on the results at the end of the experiment to inform our decision making. Our academic partners have been tremendously helpful in referring students that can help us with literature reviews, with writing up randomization plans and analysis plans, and really helping with the protocol document that we want to share and have be public. They've also been instrumental in helping get broader support from their department. So we have connected with individual researchers, and then through the work, they have brought broader university support. So our 3 conferences were all held at the University of Pennsylvania, as opposed to the city. So, just that level of partnership and resources has been tremendous for us.
This brings us to the conclusion of this webinar. Again, we would like to thank Anjali for leading our webinar today. A full recording of this webinar will be available at our website by clicking the side tab labeled Events and then clicking the sub-tab labeled Bear Webinar Series. Our next webinar will be on April 17th, and we will hear from Avni Shah from the University of Toronto, Rotman. Thank you all for attending. You can exit this webinar by closing your web screen.